Hi. So I missed what you said, but I am not Earl Friedberg, and I'm not Edward Lank. My name is Dan Vogel. I'm at the same university. So Ed basically had some kind of family emergency. So when I got off the plane yesterday, I heard that I'm giving this talk. So I'm somewhat. I mean, I've heard about the paper. I've now read the paper, and I have a talk for you. So I think it's going to be fine. So I'm excited to tell you about my colleague's work. The one catch is that when you do ask questions, maybe like do the kind of question where like, wouldn't it be great if you could also do this, rather than what about this particular aspect of your methodology or something, because I may not be able to ask or answer those technical questions. So anyhow, this will be fun. So let's do this. Okay. So this talk is about green designers. And in many organizations, roles such as a sustainable designer, an eco designer, or a green designer, these are becoming more common. And we're going to use the term green designer to encompass all these different kinds of things. So what's odd is that design as a discipline is about balancing concerns. So it seems that any designer could incorporate environmentalism as a component of their design. So the goal of this study was to understand how is a green designer different than any of these traditional designers, because they seem very similar. So what did they do and how did they behave? And more particularly, given a large, diverse design team, what was unique about the role of a green designer? So part of the motivation to even begin answering these questions in the first place comes from related work in HCI and some other domains as well. But most particularly is this work by DeSalvo et al., and they note that there's a significant role of design in creating sustainable technologies. And in fact, in this paper, they actually argue that we should be studying what these green designers do. So we're kind of following exactly what this paper did. So arguably, one would expect green design to be at the forefront of this. So on the other hand, answering the question about green design and green designers in general is very challenging, because design touches all aspects of life with respect to product and experience design. So alongside DeSalvo's calls for ongoing exploration of design with respect to sustainability, one product that has achieved some attention from sustainability researchers, and maybe not positive attention, is the smartphone domain. So this is undoubtedly motivated by the observation that to be profitable in the smartphone manufacturing industry, they have to encourage rapid upgrade cycles, and disposability of old devices would be paramount. Basically, you need to keep buying a new phone. So as a result, to make this question more tractable, this work focused on green designers in the context of smartphone manufacture, particularly a smartphone manufacturer. So given an industry that seems so at odds with sustainability, how do green designers behave and act within the confines of this very particular industry? So in this talk, I'm going to give an overview of the study methodology. I'm going to present some of the findings, especially 5 themes and a notion of discursive practice. And I'll touch on the implications of this work as well. So I'll start with the methodology. So the work is structured as a qualitative study to compare green designers and other designers, or traditional designers. And the study was composed of interviews with 22 designers enlisted from a large mobile device manufacturer that shall remain nameless. And these were split into 2 different groups. So 10 of these designers were green designers, and they're selected if their job titles reference anything like sustainability, environmental design, or eco-green design. And the remaining 12 designers were in roles that are not designated as green design, and we just call these traditional designers. So selective recruiting was also used to ensure that these participants had comparative seniority and all had experience releasing products to end users. And I'll just show this is the only table in this paper, but it sort of shows a nice characteristic that this was, I know the one thing I remember about this project is that it was very hard to do this recruiting stage. So they were able to get matching in terms of seniority, so junior, intermediate, and senior, and even the ages are roughly comparable. There's a slight skewing to eco-designers being younger, which maybe there's something to that, although it's not the focus here. And later on, I'll use the prefix G for green designer and D for traditional designer when I talk about quotes. So just keep that in mind. So the process, so it was important to capture sufficient qualitative data, of course. Each designer participated in at least 3 interviews of 1 hour or more over a 16-month period. Initial interviewers focused on walkthroughs of past projects, focusing specifically on their role and their interactions with others. The interview data was continually coded using open inductive coding to identify themes, and then these themes were actually shared with those same participants in subsequent interviews so they could elaborate on and extend this initial analysis. So it was a very participatory coding process. And then later, when all these interviews were complete, overall themes and trends were analyzed using axial coding with a specific focus on themes that distinguish between these green designers and traditional designers. So that's our methodology, and now I'll characterize some of the findings. So the main part of the findings are really these 5 different themes. So a biased advocacy, these are themes that these eco designers had, or green designers had. So biased advocacy is the idea that green designers approach design from a specific perspective, biased towards one primary concern, and that concern being sustainability. Designing from ethos, so it's the idea that green designers seem to articulate design as a calling. Embracing uncertainty, it's the feeling that designing as a green designer involved less certainty in terms of solutions compared with other designers. And extending this idea of uncertainty, green designers gave the impression that they were more willing to rely on alternative ways of knowing, for example, intuition or instinct. And finally, green designers articulated a need to serve multiple roles. It was a little bit different than traditional designers. So while all designers served as facilitators, green designers also served as supporter and catalyst, roles that other designers did not articulate as a necessary aspect of their work. So given the time constraints, obviously can't go deeply into all aspects of this. I'll give you a little bit more detail on each of these themes, and I'll talk about this discursive practice idea as well. So let's talk about the first theme, this biased advocacy. So first, the notion of this biased advocacy was the most obvious difference, and it's really an expected difference when you think about it between green designers and other designers. So as this quote shows, it makes it clear that an environmental advocacy is the first concern green designers have when working on a project. And this is quite different than traditional designers who try to balance a concern for the environment with other things that they need to worry about. So essentially, this environmental bias makes a green designer's decision-making process easier because they can always go back to that to make their decision as opposed to worrying about the shareholders as well. Green designers really talked about environmentalism as something that pervaded all aspects of their lives, so both at home and at work. So they frequently talked about green design as a calling. Some mentioned their spirituality or religion as playing a significant role in their design decisions. So overall, of course, there is this question of cause and effect. So does being a green designer make you environmentally more active, or do people passionate about the environment become green designers? So while the latter is expected, from the perspective of articulated differences, it really doesn't matter. The difference observed in the study is that green designers link their work to a guiding ethos, a calling of some sort of aspects of spiritualism or altruism that was distinct from the choices and motivations of traditional designers. Green designers talked more frequently about uncertainty as a component of their design, and they were comfortable expressing that they were uncertain during design discussions and to management, and very emphasis and even to management. So whereas traditional designers were very clear that they were expected to bring knowledge of what was best from a design perspective, and that they were very clear that their decisions had to be motivated by data collected from marketing or from users. So they needed to be backed up by data. Green designers frequently mention using their intuition as a way of knowing and relying less on hard data. So one thing noted in the paper is that many designers had extensive experience, and there's evidence that intuition or gut instinct are really based on knowledge gleaned through that extensive experience. But the big difference is that green designers were comfortable just citing intuition as a justification for design decisions. So you can contrast this with how traditional designers frequently mentioned that they based their decision, again, on hard data. So finally, green designers often talked about a tension between multiple roles as a designer. Traditional designers viewed themselves as facilitators between different interests in the design process. Green designers accepted this role, of course, because they are designers, but also discussed being supporters of environmental decisions, arcing back to the earlier notion of advocacy. and also being a catalyst for change. It's interesting that other designers didn't feel the same tension. So one reviewer pointed out in the reviewing of this process that in the smartphone industry, there's this acceptance of user experience and industrial design as being very important. It may be, so this means that in these workplaces, they already understand the value of design, period, which is already something. So it may have been, it may be the case that in industries where design is less embedded, or in organizations where design and experience is less central, all designers may need to exercise the role of supporter and catalyst, and essentially be not even about sustainability design, but just about design first. So if you already have people accepting design, then there's some opening for green design can come after that, which is interesting. So given these themes, a cursory analysis of the data may really paint these green designers in kind of a negative light. So if designers are biased, they perceive themselves as more altruistic, they rely on intuition and are constantly pushing their views, I mean, it all sounds kind of bad, then that's not what we would perceive as effective collaboration in design. It almost seems like a type of anti-design in a way. However, as more time was spent with the data, especially looking at how green designers and other designers perceive green designers, this negative perspective was really not pervasive at all, or really almost non-existent. There was a context to communicative interactions based on the role of green designers that changed the overall perspective. Essentially, if you look at interactions that green designers have with others, you can use the themes I discussed earlier as lenses to view these interactions, showing that there's an aspect to behavior that is nuanced by the role and the context that that designer had. So this led to viewing green design as a discursive practice, which I'll talk about next. So the analogy used in the paper is the difference between when a friend says, "How are you doing?" on the street, or a doctor says, "How are you doing?" during a medical appointment. And it's not even just how they speak it. But the speaker's role, being your friend or a doctor, and the context, just a chance meeting on the street or in the context of a medical appointment, completely changes the expectation of what was meant and how one should respond. This is the general idea of discursive practice, which can be expanded to how these green designers have these same kinds of communicative interactions with other designers and other people on the project team. So the role of a green designer doing design is different. So green designers advocate for one worldview, specifically sustainability. They serve as an expert, a source of data themselves in the design process. So design decisions are made with the awareness of ecological considerations. So they're actually a resource for sustainability. And the context for green designers is also different. So green designers consider design as a personal process, describing comfortably, the link between their design ethos and their personal life. And traditional designers did not express these aspects. So the paper unpacks all of this in much more detail, of course, including how green designers measure success, but I don't have time to delve into those details now. So I'll briefly talk about some implications from this work. So with respect to organizational change and impact with respect to design, education, and process, and there's many implications. I don't have time to talk about them all here. So I'll focus on the implications related to impact that these designers had. So one question to ask is whether the corporate culture had changed as a result of green designers. A reviewer pointed out Ben et al.'s adoption phases for sustainable corporations, and that's what you see in the yellow there. This idea that there are these different phases that an industry goes under related to sustainability. So rejection, non-responsiveness, compliance, efficiency, and finally strategic proactivity. So this view provided a lens on green design impact. So the goal of green designers was moving beyond compliance or efficiency, these are actually easy decisions, to a more proactive environmental stance. So I guess the one question we can ask is, were these designers successful at all? And obviously they felt they were. In fact, this came up in many of the interviews. They constantly said that they really felt they were making a difference in some way. But the question becomes whether they really were making a difference or whether the decisions would have been made anyway. Essentially, green design might have allowed the corporation to just pay lip service while just adopting ideas that just made good business sense. So some of the decisions definitely fell into this category. For example, designers talked about reducing the kind of packaging that was used in products, but this also saved the company money. And of course, there's the aspect that regulatory compliance was necessary, so advocating for something like that really was a foregone conclusion. So perhaps. However, green designers could point to decisions they made that they felt didn't make business sense, make good business sense, or were needed by regulatory bodies, and there were many of these. But they did just make pure environmental sense. Things like some types of material selection that were more expensive and less robust, but had better environmental profiles, for example. So what was learned? How is a green designer really different from any other designer? So first, the study shows that differing roles, constraints, context and values, and measures of success did materially alter the perspective of green designers. And overall, these give green designers freedom to act as an advocate and to behave in a different way within the design process. Of course, care must be taken in overgeneralizing these results, given the study context, focusing on a smartphone manufacturer, but at its heart, this really is a case study of green design roles. So with that, I'd like to conclude and thank you for your time. And like I said, I'm happy to take some questions, but I may not be able to answer very specific questions, but I'm happy to have a bit of a discussion about what all of this means. So thanks for the time.
So in the spirit of talking about what may be next and what bigger questions this opens up. So I'll say that I'm now an academic, but 6 years ago, and for a very long time, I worked for Hewlett-Packard, and obviously not the company that you were working with, given that it's mobile devices you're focused on. But I had quite a lot of experience of the environment that you're speaking about. I wasn't a designer. I was actually in the research labs, but very much focused on sustainability. And do you mind popping back to the one about success, about 3 slides back, where you're talking about the success? Because I wanted to make an observation about that.
This guy? Or?
No, further back. Yeah, this is the
Here
one.
we are.
This is the one. This is the important one, yeah. So 2 things to say. First of all, even making people, so I think sustainability can be a very useful lens which makes people aware of stupid things they're doing from a financial point of view that they can solve. And that is a very good way in. So I think that even if you're finding ways to save money, it shouldn't be dismissed, if you see what I mean.
Right.
And I think there's a really good, 3M did their pollution prevention pays, where they basically rolled out questions to all their staff. This was probably in the 1980s, I think. Saying, what can we do that might reduce our waste, reduce our pollution? And they save substantial amounts of money. My memory is that it's kind of in the billions, the number of the suggestions that came in. Staff motivated by wanting to do something for sustainability, but nonetheless also making money savings. So that's the first thing to say, is I don't think that's... But the key thing that for me makes a business go further than paying lip service is when a designer identifies something that it will be nice to do. And there are business reasons why that can't happen. And then the business engages with trying to change the landscape. And it can do that in 2 ways. One is, first of all, lobbying with regard to regulation. And the second is trying to act in concert with other companies to all move together.
Right.
And there's a really good example of that, which is the high-efficiency transformers for laptops, etc., which were not financially viable, because they would add costs to laptops, etc. But a number of companies moved together with the help of World Wildlife Fund, acted as a broker, so they could all add these higher efficiency things, and now they're standard. So what I'd like to see as a suggestion for further research is whether there's evidence in this organization that the findings of the green designers percolate up to the kind of people, the government affairs people, and the strategists, and can actually change the conversations, the green designers changing the conversations that these government affairs people have with other companies and with the state.
Right, so. Right. Yeah, especially this notion of advocacy. And in fact, what you're referring to is almost this discursive practice, right? Like if you just have this role, like you have someone that actually cares about this, in fact, it's in their job title. Yeah. And then the context changes in all these project meetings, and it starts, like this paper is really about, I mean, it's an astute observation. It's about, the project teams and the design, but you know, this discursive practice can, in these roles and contexts, can go much beyond that, up, right, to the
absolutely.
C levels and V levels and out to the government.
Yes.
So
I would really like to see. I realise it's not you, and I must say, I think you did a great job of presenting something you only read yesterday.
Right. So I mean,
but it would be really nice.
Paper. Maybe, yes.
Yeah, it would be really nice if the guys that were doing that work could take find out, move beyond the designers and see what percolates outwards. It would be very interesting if they're able to use their contacts to do that. That'd be fantastic. And
I have to admit, like this whole, you know, this slide is a bit of a red herring. Like they were successful. Let me be clear. Yeah, and some of this paying lip service, I'm being a little. But I think it's a common criticism that people have, right? That, oh, they would have done it anyway. But you were right that just the fact that you brought it up, just because it happened to have a sustainable angle and you save money doesn't mean that I didn't need that.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Thanks very much. Great.
Great.
Okay. I think that's all we have time for. So thanks very much, Dan.